Battle of the Trident. The Battle of the Trident was the climactic battle of the civil war known as Robert's Rebellion. After Lord Jon Connington's defeat in the Battle of the Bells, King Aerys II Targaryen at last realized that the rebellion was a major threat to House Targaryen, perhaps the greatest threat to the dynasty since Daemon Blackfyre. Lord Robert Baratheon left Stoney Sept for Riverrun, where Lords Jon Arryn and Eddard Stark married the daughters of Lord Hoster Tully. Around the time of the Trident, Robert announced his claim for the Iron Throne and led the combined Arryn, Baratheon, Stark, and Tully host of rebels. Aerys' heir, Crown Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, returned from Dorne to take command of the royalist army. King Aerys gracelessly reminded the Martells that Princess Elia was in his power and dispatched her uncle, Prince Lewin Martell of the Kingsguard, to assume command of 10,000 Dornishmen marching up the King's Road, and joined them to Rhaegar's royalist army en route to the Trident. At the same time, Ser Barristan Selmy and Ser Jonathan Darry of the Kingsguard were sent to rally the scattered forces of Lord Connington. Additionally, Rhaegar persuaded his father to ask for help from his old hand of the king, Lord Tywin Lannister. Led by the loyalist Lords Mace Tyrell and Paxter Redwyne, the Redwyne fleet and most levies from the Reach were at the siege of Storm's End. Some of Mace's men joined Rhaegar's host, however. Rebel Army. The army of the rebels consisted of forces from the north, including Houses House Bolton, Karstark, Manderley, Mormont, Stark, and Umber. Forces from the Vale of Arryn, including Houses Arryn and Corbray, though a few houses had remained loyal to the Targaryens earlier in the war, like the Graftons. Forces from the Riverlands, although the River Lords were deeply divided during the war. House Tully and many subject lords, including House Mallister, took the side of the rebels, while other houses, such as Houses Darry, Goodbrook, Mutun, and Rhaegar, some with personal ties to the Targaryens, took up the royal cause. House Frey, the largest of the houses sworn to House Tully, was slow to gather their levies. Some of the Stormlands. Though Robert Baratheon was the Lord of Storm's End and a central figure of the rebellion, most of the Stormlords were trapped in the south, and badly bloodied by Ashford and the siege of Storm's End. As such, their contribution north of the Stormlands appears to have been limited. Royal Army. The army of the House Targaryen royalists consisted of 10,000 Dornishmen in service to House Martell. Survivors of the Battle of the Bells. These may have included loyal River Lords, Storm Lords, and Vale Men. Houses of the Crownlands, including Houses Boggs, Brune, and Crab from Crackclaw Point. A sizable host from the Reach. The Targaryen host had nearly 40,000 men, with at most a tenth of them knights. The rest were archers, freeriders, and foot soldiers consisting of spearmen and pikemen. The royalists were more numerous, but the rebels were more battle-hardened. Prelude. In his previous campaigns, Robert Baratheon had successfully led his main army north from the Stormlands to join his main allies in the north, the Vale, and the Riverlands. He cut his way through loyalist houses that attempted to stop him at Summerhall, Ashford, and Stoney Sept. At the last location, a loyalist army attempted to corner him, but in the Battle of the Bells, the armies of the North, Vale, and Riverlands arrived and their combined forces drove them off. The combined rebel army then withdrew into friendly territory north of the Trident. The River Lords remained divided, but House Tully sided with the rebels. While the rebels massed north of the river, Rhaegar Targaryen, who had ignited the entire war by allegedly abducting Lyanna Stark, finally reappeared in King's Landing and massed the bulk of the remaining loyalist forces. He then led them north to face off against Robert's armies when they attempted to cross south of the Trident and advance on King's Landing. Robert's rebel army at the Trident was composed of the forces from the Stormlands, the North, the Vale, and rebel houses from the Riverlands such as the Tullis. Robert's personal army from the Stormlands was somewhat diminished in size from all of the fighting it had seen but was more battle-hardened. The rebel forces from the North, Vale, and Riverlands had also seen action at the Battle of the Bells and though slightly outnumbered by Rhaegar's army, had more combat experience. The army group was commanded by Robert himself, Eddard Stark, Jon Arryn, Hoster Tully, and several of their banner men, including Roose Bolton of the Dreadfort. Rhaegar's loyalist army consisted primarily of the direct Targaryen vassals from the Crownlands, joined by 10,000 Dornishmen under the command of Prince Lewin Martell of the Kingsguard. Rhaegar's own lawful wife was Elia Martell, and the Mad King kept her as a virtual hostage in the Red Keep to ensure House Martell's support. A few men from the Reach were also present, but the bulk of House Tyrell's army was tied down further south besieging Storm's End, held by Robert's younger brother Stannis. Rhaegar's forces were fresh and larger than the rebel army, but were unbloodied and less experienced. Rhaegar himself commanded the loyalist forces along with several of his most trusted Kingsguard, including Ser Barristan Selmy. Battle. The two forces clashed directly on the Trident. The battle was not in favor of either side until Rhaegar was slain by Robert, resulting in a crucial and critical victory for the rebel forces. Rhaegar was killed at a fork in the river from a swing by Robert's warhammer, smashing the rubies from Rhaegar's armor with his killing stroke. This led to the site becoming known as the Ruby Ford. Dorne lost all the 10,000 troops they sent to support the Targaryen army, including Lewin Martell himself. The Targaryen army was completely annihilated, and Barristan Selmy was severely injured and captured. The rebel army took heavy casualties, but not nearly as many as the Targaryens. Robert himself was also moderately injured in the fighting. Roose Bolton counseled Robert after the battle to execute Selmy, but Robert overruled him and not only pardoned Selmy, but sent his personal maester to treat his grave injuries, recognizing the knight's courage and loyalty despite being on the enemy force. The battle took place at the crossing of the Trident that would later be known as the Ruby Ford, as Rhaegar tried to cross the river. Robert Baratheon used his booming voice to command during the fighting. The Dornishmen, under the command of Prince Lewin Martell, threatened Robert's left flank. Ser Lyn Corbray, picking up his wounded father's sword, Lady Forlorn, led a charge and broke the Dornishmen. During the charge Lyn killed the already injured Lewin. Elsewhere during the battle, Ser Barristan Selmy killed several men, and Lord Jason Mallister slew 3 of Rhaegar Targaryen's banner men. Though many great lords and knights either lost their lives or made names for themselves in the fighting, the battle was decided when Robert and Rhaegar met in single combat on horseback in the stream. Robert eventually crushed Rhaegar's chest with a blow of his warhammer. The blow was so hard that the rubies adorning Rhaegar's armor were shattered free to litter the river, giving the Ruby Ford its name. Leaderless, the royal army broke and fled back to King's Landing. Barristan was close to death when he was brought before Robert. Although he was counseled to kill him by Lord Roose Bolton, Robert spared Barristan's life and sent his own maester to tend to his wounds. Lord Wyman Manderley granted the Wolf's Den to Ser Bartimaeus as a reward for saving his life during the battle. Both sons of Mors, Crowfoot, Umber were killed at the Trident, and Lord Grandison died a year later from wounds sustained in the fighting. The son of Lord Goodbrook made peace with Lord Hoster Tully and Robert. Aftermath. The defeat marked the beginning of the end for the Targaryen dynasty. The main reason such a high number of houses had remained loyal to the Mad King was because of loyalty they felt towards his son and heir, Rhaegar. With Rhaegar dead, House Targaryen's popular support fell drastically. No army stood between the rebels and King's Landing, the only other loyalist armies being Mace Tyrell's army besieging Storm's End, and Tywin Lannister's marching from Casterly Rock towards the capital. Since Robert was wounded in the battle, it fell to Eddard to lead the rebel army south towards King's Landing, hoping to arrive before the Lannisters, who were presumably rushing to reinforce the capital city. What Eddard and Robert did not realize was that after the victory at the Trident and Rhaegar's death, Tywin had decided to betray the Mad King and join the winning side. The Lannister army arrived first, but after being let inside the gates they promptly turned on its defenders, resulting in the sack of King's Landing. Lord Walder Frey, Lord of the Crossing and one of Lord Hoster Tully's bannermen, did not appear until the battle was done, for which Lord Tully nicknamed him, the late Walder Frey. The battle was the decisive engagement of the war. Walder Frey arrived after the battle was over, so Lord Hoster Tully has since called him, the late Lord Frey, and questioned his loyalty. When King's Landing learned of Prince Rhaegar's death, King Aerys II Targaryen sent the pregnant Queen Rhaella with Prince Viserys to Dragonstone. Aerys kept Elia Martell and her children at the Red Keep as a threat against Doran Martell, Prince of Dorne, since the Mad King thought he had been betrayed by Prince Lewin at the Trident. The way to King's Landing was now open for the rebels, while the only significant loyalist force left was invested in the siege of Storm's End. The rebels also learned that Lord Tywin Lannister was heading toward King's Landing. Lord Robert Baratheon had been wounded during the battle, so Lord Eddard Stark led Robert's vanguard down the King's Road towards the capital, racing to reach it before the Lannisters. Tywin arrived first, however, and Grand Maester Pycelle convinced the Mad King to open the city gates, resulting in the sack of King's Landing. Robert succeeded Aerys on the Iron Throne. In the books. In the A Song of Ice and Fire novels, the Battle of the Trident took place at a ford over the Trident, several hundred miles north of King's Landing. The battle was only possible due to some impressive maneuvering by Robert's army from the Stormlands, which had to travel through hundreds of miles of enemy territory to link up with the Stark, Tully, and Arryn forces north of the river. The battle itself was on a large scale, with Prince Rhaegar leading 40,000 loyalist troops. The rebels had slightly less troops, but they were more experienced due to almost a year of warfare beforehand. The battle was quite bloody with high casualties on both sides, but in the end it was the loyalist force which broke and fled after Robert killed Rhaegar in an intense duel. After Rhaegar was killed, men on both sides stole the rubies that bejeweled his armor and crown, and the place where he fell was thus called the Ruby Ford. The rebel side included the main armies from the north and the Vale. Robert's army from the Stormlands had to fight its way north and was much diminished, but the remaining soldiers were battle-hardened veterans. The River Lords were split between the rebels and loyalists, though the Tullys fought on the rebel side. House Targaryen, in contrast, were a major house of the Riverlands that fought on the side of the Targaryens. The bulk of the loyalist army was composed of the full strength of the Targaryen bannermen in the Crownlands, augmented by 10,000 Dornishmen. This was supported by several loyalist Riverlands houses and surviving loyalist armies from previous battles such as the Battle of the Bells. There were a few men present from the Reach and House Tyrell at the battle, but the bulk of the Tyrell's army was tied down at the Siege of Storms and away to the south. Prince Doran Martell, furious at Rhaegar for humiliating Elia twice, at the Great Tourney at Harrenhal and by kidnapping/eloping with Lyanna Stark, was slow to lend the Targaryens aid. King Aerys, however, gracelessly reminded Luwin Martell that he held Elia, and dispatched him to lead the 10,000 Dornish contingent in an advance which threatened to break the rebel army's left flank. During the fighting Prince Luwin became badly wounded, however, and in the confusion Ser Lyn of House Corbray led a countercharge by the rebels which halted the Dornish and personally killed Luwin. Ser Lyn, in vain and arrogance, would boast about how he had personally defeated Luwin in later years, though in reality Luwin was already very badly wounded, perhaps mortally so, and Corbray simply finished him off. When Aerys, in his paranoia, heard about Rhaegar's death, he believed that Prince Luwin had betrayed him during the battle. Therefore, he sent his wife Queen Rhaella and her younger son Prince Viserys to Dragonstone, but kept Elia and her children in King's Landing as hostages against any possible Dornish betrayal. Thus, the Mad King was indirectly responsible for the deaths of Elia and her children. Other notable characters present at the battle included Jon Arryn, Hoster Tully, and Roose Bolton. The latter, following the rebel victory, suggested that Ser Barristan Selmy be killed, but Robert was so impressed by the valor and loyalty that Barristan had shown in the battle that he spared his life, even sending his own maester to tend to Barristan's wounds instead of his own, which were less serious. After the war, Robert made Ser Barristan the Lord Commander of his own Kingsguard. Robert's own injuries, however, led him to give command of the rebel army to Eddard Stark, who pursued the defeated loyalists south towards King's Landing, expecting to have to lay siege to the capital, only to find that the armies of House Lannister had already taken the city by treachery. In Fire and Blood, an ancient prophecy is mentioned: when the hammer shall fall upon the dragon, a new king shall arise, and none shall stand before him. The dragon seed Hugh Hammer arrogantly thought the prophecy was about him, but clearly it was about Robert, who killed Rhaegar with his war hammer and soon afterwards became king of Westeros, thus fulfilling the prophecy. While the battle between Robert and Rhaegar depicts them fighting each other on foot in several histories and lore episodes and in many fan arts, they've actually fought while on horseback. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.